RuthAnn, so cool that you and I get to hang out and hit record and talk to each other.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So, we had a chat on Instagram a little while back. We were talking about connecting to the neighborhood around us, and you had told me that you could talk for hours about placemaking. So, tell us a little bit about where you live, how long you've been there. Give me a little bit of background on your current situation.
Yeah, I live in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, which is a small town about 45 minutes outside Philadelphia. My husband Greg and I have lived here since 2005. So in October, it will be 18 years. So we moved here right after college. Everything happened that year where we graduated, got married, bought a house all in the same year. And we ended up in Kennett Square because it was the middle point between our two jobs. Very practical. So I was working in Wilmington at the time, and Greg was teaching in Malvern. So I had a half-hour commute. He had about 40 minutes. He also did his student teaching in Kennett Square. So that was probably our first introduction to the town. Great experience in that last semester of college doing student teaching. And then it just worked out geographically that it's like, okay, if we're going to buy a house or find a place to live, we should, triangulate appropriately. We ended up buying our first house where we lived for 15 years. We ended up buying that house from a family whose child was Greg's student when he was student teaching.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay. How did that end up coming to pass?
Well, it wasn't on purpose. We looked at a lot of houses. It was 2005. Like I said, it was during the housing bubble before the recession. And so we looked at a ton of houses. We walked into this house and we sort of walked up the stairs, and on the wall of the living room were four senior portraits of their children. And Craig looked up and said, I think I know that kid. Sure enough, it was a kid from one of his classes on the baseball team, and the teacher who Greg student taught under was the baseball coach. So it was like a lot of connections there. And so we left the house and wrote a note before we left to say, you know, hi to the parents. This is who we are. Great to see your home. And we ended up buying their house. And at closing, they were very sweet. They actually brought their oldest daughter, who was our age. So it was like very heartwarming in that regard. So I mentioned that we moved here in October, but we had our offer accepted in August of that year, 2005. And one of the famous things about Kennett Square is that is the mushroom capital of the world. So I don't know if you're aware of this, Tony, but
I know you have a mushroom
50%,
festival.
yes, 50% of the country's mushrooms are grown in and around Kennett Square. Every year we have a mushroom festival. It is the weekend after Labor Day every year. So before we had even closed, yes, we had not closed on our house yet. We decided we're going to go to the mushroom festival. So we were living in Delaware at the time. We just drove up, parked at the high school like everyone else does, walked into town to go to the mushroom festival. And it was this like crystallizing moment where I felt like this is our town. We're going to do this every year that we live here because it is so weird and funny. And so we had a great time and just started making memories right away. I think over the years, we have just grown to love this town more and more. It is a wonderful, cute town. It's very small, 1 square mile exactly, about 6,000 residents. And it's really grown and changed over the past 18 years with an upsurge of a local movement and a lot about, shopping small, things like that. And there's been a lot of good investment and development into our town. I think that we're both invested in terms of our volunteer work and just being here for such a long time. We've been able to accumulate relationships that I think make it really special.
Okay, so you mentioned a movement, and that's focused around shopping locally.
Yeah, so I think that that has gone around or it's been going on around the country in general, where there's this sort of pushback against a corporate sensibility. and where we are able to have small businesses and you're able to support them through your purchases, please do that. And so within the borough of Kennett Square, which is the square mile where we live, there are all small businesses. If there is a chain, then it's a very small chain or like a very regional chain. As soon as you step outside the borough, chains, that's kind of where it ends. But because we have so many small business owners and they're all local people generally, um, we feel, my husband and I especially, feel just very invested in supporting the people behind the businesses and trying all of them. So this is a funny story. I started getting my haircut with a new person a couple years ago, and he said, I have heard that you know everything about Kennett Square. And I said, well, maybe not everything, but what do you need to know? And he's like, I need to find a really good place to have breakfast. And I said, well, what do you like for breakfast? Are you here for coffee? Do you want pastries? Do you want like a stick to your ribs, eggs and bacon kind of place? And he's like, oh, okay. So yes, based on that, I can tell you where to go in Kennett Square. But it is because we tried everything and because we, take the effort over time to get to know the people who are there. And so I think that with this larger movement of like slow food shop small, Kennett has really come along with that. We have a farmers market, when craft fairs, things like that. All of that really resonates with the folks around here. And I think that I really enjoy that. I think that that's part of what makes our town special and makes me want to take the time, effort, put my dollars there when I can.
So Kennett Square, I was there not too long ago for your husband's birthday, and it seems to punch way above its weight. You say
Mhm.
6,000. I feel like it's got the cultural infrastructure of a town of 60,000 or more. So what do you think is special about Kennett Square? Are there particularly special people there that are making it uh, so awesome, or what do you think might be going on there? Is it the
Yeah,
mushrooms? It's the mushrooms.
right. Mushrooms certainly help. So I think there are a few things going on. One is that we definitely have some people who have lived here for a long time, longer than I have, who are making significant investment in the town. And so they are developing properties in a way that it is sustainable and is mixed use so that we have commercial um, dollars coming into the tax base as well as residential. We also, like I said, have a lot of great small business owners who are just really smart in how they're running their business, understanding the market, and how they can make that sustainable as well. I also think that our town has a really strong sense of identity, and a
Mm.
lot of it comes from this weird mushroom thing. So, in addition to the Mushroom Festival, which is a 2, 3 day thing with, it's sort of part county fair with like every fried food you can imagine, um, part like food festival. So, there are cooking demos and contests and things like that, and then just part small town pride, where in the past there's been a community parade and a classic car show, and there are like carnival rides and things like that. So it's a whole thing. Now, um, it's 30 plus years in the making, this festival, and it has
Mm.
certainly grown over time. There are some locals who I will say hate it because it creates traffic. It brings in hundreds of thousands of tourists and in a very condensed time period, very small area. So, sure, on Mushroom Fest weekend, some people just get the heck out of town and don't deal with it. And I completely get that. But I love it. I love the strangeness of it, and that I just imagine all of these people converging on our tiny town. It makes me really happy. However, I also do the festival really specifically in that I don't go when it's super busy. So, it's all that insider intel at play. So, in addition to the Mushroom Festival, we also have lots of events where we close the streets. And I think the best days and nights in Kennett Square are when we close the streets. So, one example is that on third Thursdays in the summer, we close the streets for outdoor dining. So, restaurants can double or even more their table capacity by putting tables out on the street. They take reservations and they fill up. So, I have a note to make a reservation 2 weeks out to make sure we get a table where we want to go. There's live music, there's always a kid thing like balloon animals or face painting or a movie or something like that. And it just becomes one of those things where everyone is out and about. So you see people you know, and if you miss someone, it's like, I thought I'd see you. No, were you? I was here, I was there. It is just a convening gathering place for everyone. And generally the weather is good. If it is not, it becomes this like band of brothers thing of like, I'm out here, even though it might storm. So I've been there in every situation and it is delightful. So third Thursdays are just really special. And I think it cultivates the sense of identity of like, we're Kennett Square and we get together outside. And one other example I'll give is that on New Year's Eve, we have the mushroom drop. So in New York City, you drop a ball on New Year's Eve. Well, in Kennett, we drop a mushroom. And it is an 8 to 10 foot metal mushroom, all lit up. And it goes really high in the air on a crane. And it's just sort of dangling there for I don't know, 2 hours or something. There's live music. They sell like light up thing, like swords and, wands and headbands and stuff that you can buy. People wear mushroom hats and they're like, year glasses. And we all sort of gather around this opening where they're going to drop the mushroom. Before the mushroom drops, they always play Sweet Caroline. Everyone sings it in the street. Then at the, however many.
What does Sweet Caroline have to do with mushrooms? It's just a good song. It's just a good sing-alongy song.
It's just a great sing-along song. Yeah. Everyone knows it, right? Then there, 15, 20, 10 seconds countdown. Everyone counts and the mushroom like slowly descends down because of the crane. It hits the ground and then they sort of secure it. And then everyone takes their picture with it.
Of course. Of course.
But it is hilarious. And I have not missed one yet, mushroom drop, because it's a fairly recent thing within the last 10 years. And when people have to miss it because of other plans, they are so crushed.
It's very social media aware too, to have like this awesome photo up. Everybody takes their picture with the mushroom every year.
Every year, exactly. Exactly. And so I think it's a combination of those things where definitely there are, economic reasons that Kennett punches above its weight. But I think what's really driving the town forward is, in general, this sense of identity and wanting to make it better. Now, what does better mean? Not everyone is on the same page about it. And of course, we have our like small town, some politics that go on, and there's local government and businesses and nonprofit. I mean, everyone is interacting. It's an ecosystem into itself. But in general, when Kennett is at its best is when we're all together and we're doing something that's kind of unique, straying to the edge of weird, but is in general really fun.
Yeah, heck yeah. I mean, why not? Right? It's integrated into the fabric of why the town is there, why the people are there, the work that they do, the harvest that the town brings in. I mean, that's deeply rooted in history, celebrating a harvest.
Yes. Well, and so our town's really interesting in that our population is about 50% of Mexican heritage, which is disproportionately high for our area and our part of Pennsylvania. And that is because of the mushroom industry. So we had a long time of migrant workers coming through. They ended up at these mushroom houses. So mushrooms are grown indoors. There's actually no reason why there would be a confluence of mushrooms growing here. It's not as if it's like due to the climate or something. There are these climate controlled houses, but these Mexican families stayed in the area where they could have stability and grow. And so half our population is of Mexican heritage. And that brings richness to our town. We have an amazing Cinco de Mayo festival. And like for another example, everything at the Mushroom Festival is translated in Spanish, all of the PA announcements, things like that. So I love that about our town. We have the best tacos, I will just say. Maybe not ever, but very, very good, again, for our area. But with that comes, friction. So we have class and culture coming up against, that it emerges in ways in our public discourse that is just, uncomfortable
Mm.
sometimes. And that is part of our life as a town as well. So I, you know, have joked with people or they have commented that there's like a Stars Hollow type of feeling when you come to Kennett Square because it's very quaint. And it's like, yes, that's true, but that's not all of it, in that we are grappling with the same, struggles that
Mm.
I would say every other, city or town is dealing with. I think that we have the potential and the resources to work through that. And that's part of placemaking too. It's not, I think it's very, and I was talking to a friend who used to work for a nonprofit that does great work in our town with cultivating, like convening and fun things to do, things like that. And she said, sometimes I just get discouraged because I feel like all I'm doing is encouraging people to buy things.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel that too, because a lot of things, like the person who cuts my hair is asking me, where should I get breakfast? It's like, yeah, I can encourage you to buy things, but well, and please also do these free things like go to public meetings, like
Mm.
volunteer, like
Mm.
tell your neighbors about the fun things you're doing. All of that stuff is free. And I think when it comes to loving the place where you live, it's not just about loving the things it can give you.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
loving
Amen.
what it's going through. And that's hard sometimes.
No, you mentioned that, and it seemed like you had a little bit of a moment there of maybe acknowledging that that isn't that people don't always necessarily feel invested in their areas, or that they're thinking more in terms of what it can provide them. Can you tell me a little bit more, kind of what you're thinking in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really natural. So, we were looking for a place to live. And so when we found Kennett, it was very advantageous to us in terms of where our jobs were. And the jobs were the thing that came first. We didn't say, we want to live in Kennett Square, so where are we going to work? I do think that has flipped now, where for us, where Kennett is the starting point, a starting point, and then we go from there. We assume that. So, say someone's looking for a place to live. A lot of families are going to look at the school district. They're going to look at the cost of living, how much taxes are, if there are the things around them that they value, like maybe they want a really good grocery store or they want proximity to like a park or something like that. Those are all things that a town can give you and can't. I mean, I think it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't think it stops there. And so the point to which the place stops giving you things, that's where I think the rubber meets the road of like, well, are you invested in it? Or are you just using the place as a commodity that you're willing to pay for through your property taxes or what have you?
Yeah, and it seems that that's been a bit of a shift or a trend in terms of people's relationship with place, which may have been driven by any number of factors, but
Right.
we end up in this place where we're seeing folks who think about where they live or where they might want to live based on purely on what it can give them, without really thinking about what they can give back to it, or not even that it's a give and give, but it's that it's a relationship,
Mhm.
it's a two-way relationship that gets richer the more that you treat it like one, as opposed to just saying, what can I get out of it for me?
Right. And I think for me, it's been a long time in building. So I joked that for the first, gosh, 7 years that we lived here, that I only slept in Kennett because I worked in all these other cities and towns and I would just commute. And a lot of what I knew and was familiar with was based on where I was working. So
Hmm.
it's like if we were going to go out to dinner, it's like, well, I know of this place because I went there with my coworkers or something like that. So let's go there, not necessarily in Kennett. And that changed over time for me. And that is why I feel like I can recognize the difference in what it meant to me to live somewhere, but then start to really love where I lived.
Hmm.
And then I think the next step for me was, oh, well, this place actually does have great restaurants and it has places to walk and things like that. And then once I then became more involved and familiar, I begin to see, oh, these are some of the hard things that are happening here. And that's real too. So, how do I feel about that? And how am I not responsible necessarily, but what is my role
So there
in
was a point,
hard places?
and you said it was 7 years. So you moved 2005.
Yep.
You went good 7 years, 2012 or so.
Yep.
Something started to shift. Was there a particular breakthrough or moment or thing that happened that maybe helped to turn that corner in terms of your relationship with the town?
Yeah, I would say there were two main things. So one is that Greg and I started attending a church that was much closer to us in town. So before we had been attending a church where we attended in college and great relationships. It was wonderful for our relationship and that's where we got married and so many great things there. But it was a 20-minute drive. Eventually we started going to a church that was much closer, and we met a lot of people who lived a lot closer, and that church connected us to several nonprofits in the area where we could volunteer and just learn more about how they contributed to the town and who they served. And so that was huge. Not
What kinds
just
of nonprofits?
Yeah, so there are two main ones that we still support and they do great work. One is a youth center called the Garage, and they have after school programming, mentorship, tutoring for middle and high school youth, and they do amazing work. We have gone to their like charity event, not every year, but a lot of years now. And then out of that nonprofit came another called Young Moms, which serves teen moms with education, mentorship, and like physical needs for themselves and their families.
Amazing. And
Yeah,
so I have a personal curiosity around this piece in particular, because volunteering comes up often when we talk about how do you get more,
yeah,
connected or related to where you live. And there are resources to find, where can I volunteer in my area, those kinds of things. But I've also found it to be a little bit tricky to break the ice.
yeah,
So, like, I'm brand new to this city that I live in right now. I don't really know anybody here. Um, I imagine that the church, as a middleman for that, is so valuable because there's people who are doing it, who can introduce you, who can tell you, "Hey, I'm going to be there on Tuesday." Those
right.
kinds of things. What so, like, can you tell me just like a specific example of like the first time you volunteered at one of those places and just how that moment happened where you actually showed up and did it?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. So, while the church introduced us to people and organizations, I would say that the organizations where we volunteered, it was more of a one time thing. So, it's like we're having an event where we would volunteer. It was not on an ongoing basis, which a lot of people volunteer on an ongoing basis. That was not my experience at the time. But
Hmm.
the thing that changed for me for volunteering was volunteering at the library. So, I'm a big reader, as you know, and big library patron. I've been a patron for however many years. And then I thought, I wonder if there's any volunteer opportunities.
Yeah.
So went on the website and I was a very like surgical library patron. So I would just put books on hold. I would go in there, get out my holds, and then leave. Like, I didn't really hang out at the library. That's fine. Love those people. I filled out the volunteer form and I didn't know anyone. I didn't know the staff or anything. And I just said, I would be willing to help with circulation, which is shelving,
Yeah.
um, and communication. But like anything else that you need, let me know. Well, it turns out their number one need was circulation because when the staff was busy helping people, they could not reshelve the items that were coming back in returns in the drop box. It would be these gigantic bags of books that need to be sorted and then shelved. Our library is not huge, or it was not at the time, but still, it's like physical work to actually do it. There's no fast way of doing it.
Yeah.
And so when I just signed up for a slot once a week, I would go for an hour or two, something like that. This was pre-pandemic. And shelf books and just I'd come in and they'd say like, yes, do that section, whatever. And let me tell you, Tony, it was delightful.
Just
After
you and the books. Just you
exactly
on the stacks, moving the books
and
around. Yeah.
I just have this rolling cart that was total chaos. I could sort it and then put it where things need to be. I would line up the books against the edge. At the end, I had this like tangible, beautiful thing. I sometimes would take the liberty of like putting a book face front, but I was like, you know what? People need to know about this first. I was like, as like my agenda, right? And so
You got to exercise a little bit of editorial thinking.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And at time and then because of that, I started talking to the staff. And so very, lightly, because I didn't want to get in the way of their main job, which is to serve patrons. And so, but then they learned that I was a big reader and I would get called in sometimes of like, hey, RuthAnn, a person needs a recommendation about, and I would come like scurrying over. That was delightful. So I did that for 2 years at least.
Wow.
In that span of time, I also sort of eavesdropped on the programming that was happening at the library while I was shelving. So I would be on like a stool, putting books on a shelf. Meanwhile, the corner of my ear, I hear things like board game club, like graphic novel book club, like teen makerspace. And I thought, this is amazing what the staff is doing with very little resource, honestly.
Yeah.
So that was incredible. Like I would not have had that insight if I was not in the library every single week. Cause like I said, I would just go in and out like 2 minutes. I would never
Yeah.
spend time there.
Right.
The other thing is that I observed how the staff interacted with the patrons. So there are a lot of questions these days about what a library is for. Is it just for books? Is it appropriate for there to be maker spaces? Should we have computers there, etc.? Our library has computers. A lot of the folks who we serve do not own computers, especially teenagers. And so they'll come in the library straight after school and do their homework on these computers, or they'll job search or whatever, do research. And if they don't have something to do, they'll play games.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are like, I don't know, like I'm being like a grouchy person. I don't know why these kids are just playing on the computers. It's like, and the staff was great. They're like, there's no line for the computers.
Yeah.
If there becomes a line, then we will ask them to leave. But for now, they're fine.
Yeah. Why
And
not?
that was so powerful to me just to witness that the staff was taking care of these teens, these kids who didn't have the stuff at home. So why not?
Yeah.
Why not allow the library to be that space for them? So that was incredibly encouraging to me. But again, it was showing up consistently that gave me the exposure to what was actually happening in that organization. And so this is, I think, a good example where it's like, I came to the library because of what it could give me. It gave me free books.
Yeah.
Then I started giving it time because I had it. And it was great for me too. So then I began to see some of the challenges that the library was experiencing, like funding, like limited space, things like that. And then an opening came up on the board because I was familiar with the staff and they knew I lived in the borough. Once they learned that was the case, they like quick whisked my name to the people who knew. Now I had to apply and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But that led to me serving on the board for 3 years. And that gave me even more insight into what was happening and this huge new building project, which has only just been completed. So 2 weeks ago, our beautiful new library building opened to the public. And I would love it anyway, but I love it even more because I understood what the before was like in terms of their
Mhm.
limitations of what the staff could do with the space they had. That's what I mean. The staff, they are like miracle workers.
Yeah.
But now that they have all of this space and the resources, technology to do amazing things, it's incredibly exciting to cheer them on and encourage other people to say, oh, you do not know what they were dealing with before. Here's why. Like, imagine this situation. And now they have this. Isn't that exciting? So I can advocate for them even more strongly because I have been around them now for so many years. So that I think is really my volunteering story, where it's like out of my own interest in books, which is very natural and I would do anyway, came this visibility of this organization. And now I have rolled off the board, but I chair our communications committee. And so that's really just about supporting the communications staff.
Mm.
So we have a meeting, we talk about what their priorities are, where we can help them. And like it's what I do professionally. So it's very easy for me to channel that into this organization and just support the staff. That's all my role is there. And it's great. It feels gratifying to invest in them as professionals and see it come to life in the life of the organization. So, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yes, 100%. I'm so amazed to hear this progression, and just knowing that. Look, part of the hypothesis I'm playing with is that we have a lot of folks who feel disconnected, don't feel like they have a strong relationship with their neighborhood, with their neighbors, and we're just getting pulled further and further into our, like, scrolling on a screen in our homes kind of rabbit holes.
Yeah.
But the antidotes are, this is my hypothesis, that there are really easy antidotes that are readily available that might be just as simple as walking into the library and even just hanging out there for a little bit and
Yeah.
observing what's going on, seeing what kind of events are happening, and then even going so far as volunteering. And volunteering at a library restocking books sounds like an astoundingly easy thing to do, even if I'm socially awkward, if I'm not comfortable
Yes.
around if I have anxiety. Like, part of the things that we talk about is, um, I used to think that solving this loneliness epidemic or something was about being more social, getting more people into like better
Mhm.
facilitated events and activities. And then over time, it kind of evolved for me that instead, I think it's about helping people find what works for them in a way that
Yes.
gets them, whatever that is, whether it's,
Mhm.
social or not social, but that you're relating to the environment around you in some way that's healthy that you haven't been doing before. And it doesn't always have to mean, being a super extroverted person, going to networking events, things like that.
Yes, I was just going to mention that because I am incredibly introverted. So, shelving books is a great job for
Yeah.
me. What I love is a one-on-one interaction. And
Yeah.
I think that's true of a lot of introverts where it's like fewer, deeper.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so going to a really big event is actually a huge turnoff for me. And by really big, I have a low bar for that. Probably over 20 feels big to me,
With the exception of the Mushroom Festival, obviously, of course. Yes.
obviously, but I go when it's not crowded.
There you go. There you go.
Yes. So having a conversation with a librarian or with a patron who needs a book recommendation is like wonderful
Yeah.
to me. But going to a larger event, maybe that the library hosts, depending on what it is, I might go, but I will more likely help with setup ahead of time.
Mhm. Mhm. It makes so much sense, and look at the social effects that come from that. You built relationships. You ended up on a board, for heaven's sakes. And I think one of the things I've observed is that I think sometimes people conflate introverted with antisocial, and it's
Yes.
super not true. Like, you could be very social and be introverted and be very happy and very connected and very involved. And I think that what you're describing is actually an excellent case of that.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And a part of how I operate is that I try very hard to learn people's names and remember them and greet them by name.
Mm-hmm.
And I know not everyone can do that, and I've had a lot of practice, but I just find that to be such a powerful connecting, I'll say, mechanism. That sounds very calculating, as if I'm like, this is how I'm gonna win people over. But I think it's really powerful. Like, even this morning I went to the library, and when I walked in, I loved that I could say, "Good morning, Laura," to the
Yeah.
librarian. Not be She was wearing a name tag, but I didn't need it. But if I needed it, I could still greet her by name. So I think that's really important, that it's like they're people doing a job, yes, but they're people first.
Yeah.
And so I think that is huge
Mm.
and something that anyone can do.
Remember a name. Yeah.
Also,
Yeah. Do you have any tricks? Because I'm terrible at it.
yeah, so the number one thing I do is that when I meet someone for the first time is that I repeat their name out loud. And if I don't hear them or if I don't think I can say it, I'll say, "I'm sorry, could you say it one more time for
Yeah.
me?"
Right.
And then I'll say, "Okay, Camila?"
Yeah. Camila.
And they'll be like, "Yes, Camila," or they'll correct me. It's like, "Oh," and then I'll say it
Right. Camila. Nice to
again.
meet you, Camila.
Right, right, exactly. And so hopefully not to make it weird, but that's one way to get it in my brain. Another trick, again, trick sounds weird, but another thing I love to do, genuinely love to do, is ask people what's something, what's one thing you're really into?
Okay.
If I were to ask you that, what would you say?
Karaoke.
Karaoke, and I would say that is awesome. I also love karaoke. What's your go-to karaoke song?
Blister in the Sun.
Oh my gosh. That is so interesting. Okay, see, so I don't want to get on a tangent on Blister in the Sun, but then I ask follow-up questions and actively listen to what they tell me because people love to talk about what they love. And so it is very easy to draw someone out. I'm asking the questions. I don't need to then be the response. Sometimes I'll chime in as well, but generally I'm just asking questions. So then I say, after the conversation, I'll have like a little debrief with myself and say, okay, I just met Tony. Tony likes karaoke. If I see Tony again, I might ask him, have you gone lately?
And you do that like a little button to a conversation after you've met somebody.
Yes, just mentally.
Yeah.
And sometimes I rarely will write it down or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But because I've been doing this for years now, when I see someone again, it's like a memory device switches on. I'm like, Tony, great to see you. Have you done any karaoke lately?
Right. Which is like so simple, but especially to like a connection starved world of people, especially in like a
Yeah,
library situation, you might have people who don't have a lot of friends or don't interact socially a lot. To just know RuthAnn at the library knows my name and knows I like karaoke, it's enormous. It can make a
yeah,
real difference in people's lives.
yeah, yeah. And it's a genuine thing for me in that I love talking to people who are into things. Like, it does not matter what it is because enthusiasm is awesome. And so I have never had a conversation like this that I couldn't just keep up with follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Because even if I do not like the thing, I'll be like, "Tell me why you like that,"
Yeah.
because I do not get it,
Right.
and
Yes.
it's the easiest thing, and then if I happen to like it, I'm like, "Yes, me too, let's jam on it."
You can't go wrong.
No, I love it so much, and it feels like a cheesy, like, icebreakery type of question, but it is not even like, "What's the thing you're most into?" That's a totally different question.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Just pick one." You could be into, like, 12 things, but Just pick one. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, and everybody likes to nerd out about something.
That's how I feel. And if someone doesn't have an answer, I'm like, what would you like to be? That's never happened. That's never happened because sometimes someone will be like, "Oh, I'm not really into things, just my kids." I'm like, easy. Kids are the easiest things. Tell me
Exactly.
about your kids.
Right.
How old are they? How many do you have?
Yeah, right. It's funny 'cause sometimes you do have to draw it out a little bit where people don't necessarily think they have an answer
Right.
or they don't, but then you just crack the ice a little bit and it's right there under the surface.
Yeah, yeah. And it's showing curiosity, interest in them as a person, validating that the thing they're into is cool.
Mhm, mhm.
And pretty much everything is cool that people are willing to talk about in these situations. So it's great. I just love it. And it gives me a hook
Yeah,
for that conversation instead of just like, oh, I met Bill. He works in operations. Like, ugh, I can't
yeah,
put that together.
yeah. But to your point, it's interesting because they're interested in it,
Yes,
and that makes it interesting regardless of what it is, because the
exactly.
yeah.
And there's a story. There's always a story of like, well, when I was a kid, I would go to baseball games with my dad, or in summers, we'd always go fishing, or whatever, anything. It's like, okay, let's talk about that.
Amazing. Absolutely love it. Okay, so working, volunteering in a library, you've spent a lot of time with a lot of books. Tell me, first of all, did you ever have a moment? I'm sure you've had many, but is there one particular moment that stands out when you were restocking a book and you were like, "Nuh-uh, this one's coming home with me," and it was like just there was like an element of magic, maybe? Maybe I'm getting greedy with that.
You're not getting greedy. So there's this idea in the book readerly world of book serendipity,
Mm.
where books find you at times when you need them. And this was maybe not quite at that level, but I've been hearing about this book called Harry's Trees. It's a novel and it's like very heartwarming. And I just seen it on a bunch of lists, whatever year that was, probably 2 or 3 years ago. Well, pre-pandemic again, so more than 2 or 3 years ago. Um, and so I happened to shelve that book, and I had it in my hands. So it had come back to the library, and I thought, I've been hearing a lot about this book. Should I just read it? I should probably just read it. So I like put it to the side for myself, you know, checked it out. And my volunteer day was Thursday. So I checked it out that day. I finished it over the weekend.
Okay.
And it's a great novel. It's like small town, interesting characters. The trees are not a character necessarily, but they figure predominantly in the book. There's this like idea of the forest versus the woods. One is scary, one is not. And this idea of like fairy tales always involving like a wood in some way. Um, and so thoroughly enjoyable, but it was serendipitous for two reasons. One, that I kept hearing about it over and over, and then it sort of just appeared in front of my eyes, even though I would not have sought it out.
Mhm.
And the second is that it came at a time where I was incredibly busy with work and other things. And I tend in those times of life to like push myself even harder in my reading, which is to say that I usually read hard things,
Mm.
like hard nonfiction.
Mhm.
That's like I'm like studying something or it's like for work or something like that. So I just get in a mode. But this is nothing like that. It's a novel. And it was like such a restful reading experience over that weekend. And after I finished, I thought, oh my gosh, this book came at just the right moment that I had heard about it enough to know to notice the title
Yeah.
and that it was available for me to check out. And so I did. And I happened to be volunteering and got
Voila.
it when it came back. So that is something that stands out to me. It's definitely a book that I just would not have looked for on my own. Not because I felt like it was going to be bad or something. It just hadn't been compelling based on what I had heard from other people. They said that they liked it.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have picked it up. But it was like, I'm holding it now. I think I'm just going to take it
Yeah.
home.
And it was well worth it.
It was worth it. Yeah. And it's the kind of book that I recommend to people. It's a book that I don't have like super strong impressions of to say, like, this part of the book was like this. But I remember the book being very just warm. And I read it, I remember it was December. So I remember it feeling like a comforting. read
Mm,
and that it was kind of lighter. So a lot of my reads tend to be heavy. And so when people ask for a lighter book, I'm like, ooh, this one's a little bit lighter.
that's beautiful. And in terms of books in just in general, I know that you do love to read the odd book and love to make recommendations. Anything in particular recently that's just had a big impact on you that you just want to tell everybody about?
Yes. Okay. So this is not incredibly recent because I read it at the beginning of this year.
We'll let it in.
However,
We'll count
we'll let it, thank you. But I bring it up because I keep recommending it to people and I keep thinking about it. So the book is 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman. Have you heard of this book?
Only through you.
Okay, great. Yes. Okay. So this is a nonfiction book written by a productivity expert. And he comes at it from a perspective that we as humans have limited time on the planet, about 4,000 weeks. And so, yeah, so how does that number hit you?
I'm doing the math in my head right now.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not that long.
No, it's not a lot of Saturdays. I immediately went to the Saturdays. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, totally. And so he says, it's not about getting as much done as you can, which is what most productivity time management strategies are about. Getting things done
Mm,
and being efficient with your time. It's like there's a piece of that, but it's about doing the things that you want to do.
mm, mhm,
And so, how do you know what you want to do? And so, that premise of finitude was so interesting and powerful to me. I felt like it's just not, it's countercultural because I think that a more appealing concept is you can do anything. Anything you put your mind to, you can accomplish.
mm,
And I'm all for dreaming big, working toward your goals. Yes, I'm a, like list maker, box checker. But really, we are limited in lots of
mm.
ways. Like, I have been the same height since I was 16 years old. Not getting
Not
any
gonna
taller,
change.
people,
Probably
right?
not gonna change.
Right. And if maybe downward, but that's okay that I am limited in that way. I don't have to lose any sleep about it. So he's saying your
Legroom's
time
not as
is
much
limited.
of an issue on an airplane.
Oh my gosh, it's great. I can stand up under a bulkhead.
And yeah, and I never fit in anything. So,
Correct.
everything
See,
everything has its yeah, exactly.
yes. So I love that this book is taking that premise and then saying, okay, if we take this as a given, then what?
Mm,
How do you know what you want to do and make the right time for it, knowing that your time is limited? He also has this idea not just of sort of, goal achievement, but also this idea of wonder,
mm,
which is a concept that I've been thinking about a lot in the past couple of years. And he says there's something innately unproductive about wonder
mm,
because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't make you any money. It doesn't create an object. It doesn't bring you an accolade. But if you notice a sunset or a beautiful work of art, it's doing something in you. So then, what the question he prompts to ask is, what prompts wonder in you?
mm,
And how do you make time for that?
mm.
And so those two things together were just so interesting to me that I'm still like rolling it in my head 6 months later.
Yeah, they're powerful concepts. I mean, they're especially if you can take some time to really think on them a little bit. Yeah, we need
Yeah,
more we need
I
more of
highly
that.
recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What what's what's okay, so being mindful of time. I want to ask about food. I'm interested in food because of many reasons, but it's so tied to who we are, it's so tied to our identities. Kennett Square's amazing identity uh, is tied to food. Uh, so do you have a recipe that you would like to share, and why would you like to share it?
Sure. Yes. So the recipe that I thought of when you asked me this question is something I actually made it for lunch for my lunches this week. I do a whole batch thing and then I eat the same thing every day. Um, it is a baked farro recipe that uses summer vegetables. So things that are in season right now, it's July. So we have squash, tomatoes, and corn all go into this dish. It's made to be vegetarian, but it's easy. You can add meat if you want to. And I just find it to be comforting, but also so flavorful and pretty easy to make. So I make a half batch for myself for lunches, super easy. And it's from a food blog that I have been following for years, Smitten Kitchen. I swear by her. She's my go to. Whenever I have anything that I need to use up, it's like, what does she do with this? Um, so that's like a very current thing that I would say is um, just high in my list right now because the produce is so good.
Mm.
And I will say this is not necessarily, actually, it is related to Kennett Square. So Greg and I belong to a CSA, community sponsored agriculture, with a local farm. And this farm is now located about 30 minutes away. But when we joined, they were at a rented property, maybe a quarter mile from our old house. And so just outside our town. And so we have, I think this is our 8th year as a part of this farm. And so we have seen this farmer and his family grow. Like they now have 3 little girls. They had 0 when we first started using their share. They used to have a model where you would just get a box of produce and whatever you get is what you got.
Mm.
That's very typical. But they have grown in such a way that now they use this online system where you can build your own box week to week. And it is awesome. It is so great. And we love to hype it to our friends. And because Greg works nearby, he had the opportunity to set up a pickup spot at his office. And so, because of that, the farm now has at least 20 people from that office who get a share. And that's been going on for years now. So, it just feels like between our joining years ago and then developing a relationship with the farmer, and then when it became possible to have a pickup spot, very convenient to us. I think the farmer said, as long as we have 5 pickups, I can make it worth it to have a spot. So we're like, okay, to put it out to people and see if we can get 5. And it's at least 20, maybe 30 people who get a box every week.
Wow. That's
I
incredible.
know.
I
Yeah.
love it. And just the connection to the land, connection to food and the producers, the local producers is nothing but
Yeah.
good comes from that.
Yeah. And it's great. I mean, I think it's educated us on what's in season and how to cook with it. It's not as much in the beginning, it was like, oh my gosh, what do we do? We've never used like kohlrabi before, something like that. But even so, it's been really eye opening. And he's very open about what it's like to run a farm as a small business. And so we feel great supporting them. And I think the produce is better anyway. So it's just a win-win all around. And summer is like peak produce season.
Love it. Absolutely love it. RuthAnn, before we go, any links that you want to share with anybody who's tuning in, either to you or to anything you mentioned?
I don't think so. I will recommend one other book, which I have mentioned to you before, and the title is "This Is Where You Belong" by Melody Warnick. I read this book years ago, and it has made a big impact on me in terms of how you can cultivate place attachment right where you are. And the 2 things that really stick with me are to walk a lot if you can, because it gives you time to take in the things around you, and to do weird things. So I think those 2 really come to light in Kennett Square. But she talks about the power of staying. So she says that she has wanderlust as a person who had moved a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of it is choosing to stay,
Yeah.
and what that looks like, how you commit to a place as well, because it's a relationship. So I would recommend that book.
Absolutely love it. And so excited for your next mushroom festival. Want to see if we can get down for it, or at least
Yes, please
learn
do.
more
We'll
about it.
be here.
RuthAnn, so great we get to hang and just have this conversation. And I'm excited to see how things progress with you and with your lovely library and everything else in Kennett Square.
Great. Thanks so much, Tony.
All right.